Hello and welcome to session 5. So this video is going to be about how to create more of what you want through becoming more conscious of where your focus is. So in the last few videos, it's really been about explaining where most of your focus is and explaining that most of your focus is unconscious. So it's on things like what you fear, what you don't want to happen, and what you're trying to actually get away from and resist. So if your focus stays unconscious, then you won't create intentionally and you will keep creating a lot of unwanted things in your life, which is what most people are experiencing most of the time. So to change this, you must become a lot more conscious about where the attention is of your consciousness. So you must become more intentional about what you're creating. So if you're like me, and I guess the vast majority of people on the planet, creating what you would really like to see in your life has been frustrating, right? It feels like a lot of effort. You seem to get a little bit towards what you would like, and then it just comes back. And then you get a little bit towards, and then it just comes back, right? So it creates this pattern sort of like this. So it's hard to get that momentum that just keeps rolling consistently towards what you want. And so you just find yourself oscillating. So in relation to this phenomenon, the first thing I want to talk about is structure, because this will explain why this happens. So maybe in a way that you've never heard of before, but structure is the thing that will really underpin everything you create. And of course, guess what creates the structure? It's focus, obviously. It's all I really talk about. So it's where your focus is going to determine the structure that you create. So what is structure? So what is a structure? Basically, a structure is a group of parts, a group of things that work together. So these parts affect the flow of energy that is put into the structure. So a structure can only move in a way that the structure allows for when energy is put into it. So you can have 3 types of structures. The first structure is one that's stuck, right? It doesn't move, it doesn't go anywhere. Then you can have the structure that oscillates, which most people are in. And then you can have the structure that just flows. So in the physical world, to give you an example of these structures and to let your mind be able to picture this, a stuck structure would be like a building, a house, or a big, tall building. So it can't move. The structure is fixed and it's in place. Or another example would be a fence. So by definition, a fence is put in place to not move because it's usually outlining a boundary. An example of an oscillating structure is like a rocking chair. So if you can imagine a rocking chair, it just goes forwards and back, forwards and back. No matter how much energy you put into it, it can really only do one thing, just go forwards and back. An example of a flowing structure is a wheel. So if you get a wheel, and you push it and you put energy into it, the wheel is going to flow and roll. Now, as a universal law and principle, I know I give you many, but it's important to understand these things. Energy is always going to take the path of least resistance. So energy is always going to take the easiest path, the quickest, easiest path. So as an example, for electricity, the metal copper is used in the wiring for electricity because it's been found out that the metal copper is the path of least resistance for electricity. So that's why it's used in electrical cables over other metals. Even though other metals also can be a conductor for electricity, copper is the path of least resistance. So you, as we've already discussed, your energy as well. So you are going to take the path of least resistance as well, based on the structure that you are in. Now, the structures that I've talked about have been physical structures, but you also have mental and emotional structures that you put yourself in that are created by your focus. So there's basically two structures that you can be in. Most people are in what we call the problem solving structure. So they're trying to get away from what they consider a problem. They're trying to either fix themselves in a way that they feel like they're not enough, or they're broken, or they're incomplete some way, and they need to fix themselves before they create what they would want or what they would love. Or they're in a current reality where their now moment is not good enough. So, for example, people who are trying to get away from problems such as, I don't have enough money, or they're trying to get away from their body is not the way they want it is. So they're trying to lose weight. They're trying to get away from something. Or people are lonely. Okay, so they're trying to get away from being lonely. Or very common is people who are trying to get away from a job that they hate. Okay, so they're trying to solve a problem, and unwittingly, they don't realize that they're putting themselves in the structure of problem solving, that they're in a problem. So another thing to understand, that within structures, within the physical world and within your mind, there is an invisible force called tension, which is pulling on the parts to move them and keep them in the structure. Okay, so once again, for an example, physically for your mind to understand this concept of tension within structures is the human body. Okay, so the human body is a structure. So when you if I was to show you this, if you put tension on this muscle, right, it's going to pull. And then when I put tension on this muscle, it's also going to pull. So tension pulls the structure of the parts. Hopefully that's clear, because that's really, really, really important to understand why the problem-solving structure pulls you towards what you're trying to get away from. It's the only way structure and tension can work. So it's really important to understand that within structures, physically and mentally, you have tension that pulls the parts that are interacting with each other together. So, what do you think is going to happen if you include in your structures fear, problems, and what you're trying to get away from? It's obvious, but you will create tensions that pull them towards you. Because with your focus, you are creating an energy structure around them that keeps creating them. So people have heard this before, but you cannot run away from your problems, because you can't actually get away from anything. It will follow you all over the earth. Whatever you're trying to get away from, you're creating, and it will seem like it's following you. So once again, it comes down to knowing how to use your focus to be in the right structure. So the good news is there's only two structures, right? It's pretty simple. You're either in the structure of what you want to be creating, which is, just what you love, right? You're just in the structure of creating something for the pure joy of creating it. That by net definition means you're not trying to get away from anything. You're just in pure creation and joy. Or you're in the structure of how something is wrong with you or your life, or that you are incomplete in some way, and that you need to change yourself first before you can just actually go and create what you love. So it's a very small distinction, but it's massive in terms of shifting your focus. So if you create a structure that is only including what you want to create, what you want to move towards, then the tension in that structure has to pull you towards what you're creating. It can only resolve itself that way if you stay in the structure and if you stay focused on what it is that you're creating. So by that definition, it sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's not easy. The reason why it's not easy is because it is very easy to slip into old structures and patterns of problem solving, fear, and things you're trying to get away from. Now, why is that the case? Because that's very annoying, but why is that the case? It's because it's what you have practiced your whole life. Not intentionally, but this is what all of us have practiced our whole life. It's how society is set up. I mean, society is always trying to get away from problems as well. So we know that anything you practice over and over again becomes easy and it becomes unconscious. So remember what it was like when you first started to drive, right? When you're first learning that skill of driving, everything takes a lot of conscious effort, doesn't it? It's like you have to focus on so many things at once, and it seems difficult. Your hands are on the wheel, you're looking at the cars, you're looking in the mirror, you're looking at the signs on the road, what you're doing with your other hand, right? It seems so difficult and takes a lot of mental energy and effort. And that's what it takes to be conscious. It takes a lot of mental energy and effort. So, and you know, when you're driving, you would look at people who had driven for a long time, and you could see that they were just talking on the phone, eating something and driving, and doing it all so very easily. And that's what happens when you do something over and over again. It becomes easy. It becomes unconscious. And you build an unconscious structure around driving, which is great because it makes it so easy. And so it's not that the unconscious is bad, but it's just knowing how it all works, right? Because sometimes being in an unconscious pattern, it does actually serve you, like driving a car, or like talking a language, or like walking, right? You teach yourself the unconscious patterns and it serves you. It just doesn't serve you when you're trying to create something new. So it's just important to understand that distinction. When you try to create something new, it's very easy to slip into unconscious structures and patterns. And yeah, really important to understand that. So like I said, most people are in the structure of, you know, I have a problem, or my life has a problem, or I'm fearful of something happening, or trying to get away from something. So the tensions and the flow of energy in this structure that is created by what you're focused on can only flow towards these things, right? It's just how structure works. So a river can only flow down the construct of its banks with the forces of gravity, because that's the structure that it's in. The energy must flow down that. It doesn't matter how much work you do on that water, it's never going to actually flow upstream, right? The structure won't allow it to move in that way, because energy, as I said, is always flowing down the path of least resistance. So now that you know that, you can choose to create a structure that allows you to effortlessly flow towards what you're trying to create, using the same principles of structure and focus as above that we've just described. So you can choose consciously to create a structure with your focus on what you wish to create, what you want to move towards. Once again, purely because you would just love to create it, just for the joy of creating it. So you're not trying to move away from anything. You're just moving towards something. It's a completely different structure, and it contains nothing apart from where you are now and where you would like to go. Hopefully that's clear, because it's the key distinction that will get you out of oscillating and get you into just flowing towards what you want. So as always, to get more of what you choose to create, you just got to focus on what it is you're creating, what it is you're moving towards. And this is why people who are really good in business are always focused on solutions and not problems. Okay? Most people, we're just focused on problems. So you have to, the difficult part, but you have to become conscious about what you're thinking about what you're speaking about, and how you're acting. And with the car example, that takes a lot. You can see how that takes a lot more will. It takes a lot more effort and energy to do that, right? So you have to, the way that you do that is you have to use your mind consciously to visualize what you're creating. You have to use your mind consciously about what you're thinking about creating, and then match that with the emotions of what you will feel once the creation exists and once it's complete. And you have to match those emotions now, become all of that now. And I'll explain that in detail in the next video. We'll all go through an example together to show you all the steps of how this all comes together. Okay. But once you've actually aligned that energy with your thoughts, your words, and emotions, then you can take action, right? That's when you take the action, because that's how you know you're in alignment and in the structure of what you want to create. Now, if you slip into unconsciousness, which you will all the time, you have to consciously get back into alignment with your creation before you take action again. So to illustrate this point about getting into alignment consciously and creating the structure, one of my mentors explained this really well. So his name is William Whitecloud, and he told the story of how he was creating his first book. Okay, so he'd never written a book before, and he hadn't done well in school, so he didn't know how to write a book, and he wasn't very academic. So you can imagine there would have been, a lot of internal resistance created by his mind telling him he couldn't do it. Like saying things like he wasn't smart enough, you've never written a book before, where am I going to start? Who's going to publish? Who will listen to what I have to say? All the automatic stuff that is going to be generated by your mind every time you try to create something new. And it's going to push you back into old unconscious structures of limitation, fear, and how you need to fix yourself first before actually before writing that book. So you can see how that would easily happen to him. But, he set his intention of writing a best-selling book that would be very successful, right? That was the conscious structure he created. So that's where the energy has to flow if you create that structure. Now, of course, you're going to slip out of that back into the old fear-based structures. It's going to happen. And this happened to him when he was writing this book. And when that did happen to him, he found that he was stuck. Like he didn't know how to write, and no words were coming to him anymore. So he got that concept of writer's block, right? It's when, writers find that the words aren't flowing and they don't know what to write anymore. So when this happened, it would take effort and will, but he got back consciously into what he was creating. So he visualized, he got into the feeling and the thoughts of what he wanted to create, right? The end result of the best-selling successful book. And he consciously created that structure again. Then he found that the words started to flow. So what the amazing thing that he realized through this process is there's no such thing as writer's block. You're just not in the energy and the structure of what you're trying to create anymore. I hope you can see that. So if you have writer's block in this situation, you're in the problem-solving structure of how you are not capable, you're not enough, you're not worthy, all of this sort of stuff. So in the end, he did end up creating an incredibly successful best-selling book. So this story, I think, really illustrates the power of consciously creating a structure where the energy will just flow naturally towards what you're trying to create. But you must stay in the structure. You will be pulled out constantly. And when you do, you need to become aware that you've been pulled out and do what William did and get back into the structure before taking action again. So this really is the challenge with all of this. Like I said, it's simple, but it's not easy. Because when you're first starting this, it's very difficult for you to see where your focus is. But a clear way to see where your focus is the action that you're taking. The action is always going to show you where your focus is. So if you're in action and flowing towards your creation, then you know you're in the right structure. If you're not flowing and you're procrastinating, or you're coming up with excuses why you can't create what you want, then you're in the problem-solving structure. So before I created these videos, I consciously set an intention and created a structure around what I wanted to create, which was the best introduction to creation and how it works based on what I know, and to help anyone who watches it just to have greater awareness around how to create more of what they love. So once you set that structure, then you let go and you trust that when you're in that energy, the action you take will be correct. So you've got to let go of the judgment of how that needs to be. So that's what we'll look at in the next video, how to practically set up the right structure with your focus so that you can just flow towards what you're choosing to create.